Hi there, this is Walking Day. Today we're looking at the strong points of Juno Beach. Now the strong points on Sword Beach, we stopped at WN24, which is Luxe-sur-Mer. Now we didn't mention WN22 or 23. WN23 is Tailleville Chateau, which was attacked by the Canadians, so consider it as being in Juno sector. And WN22 was here, just north of the Deliverande, and it was one of those ephemeral strong points with nothing there, be a rallying point to defend La Deliverande. In 1944 there was La Deliverande, and then there was Douvres, and now it's one town, Douvres La Deliverande. The WN23A protected the northern approach of Douvres. The WN22 was here, in between this road into La Deliverande and the railway line, which is over there, which is now the bypass and also a cycle track. So this is where WN23A was, another ephemeral strong point to guard the approach to Douvres, which is in front of me, and behind me you can see the twin spires of La Deliverande. In 1944 there was nothing here. There was a space between Douvres and La Deliverande. That's Douvres. That's the La Deliverande. There's a bunker here in between Douvres and the radar station, in the middle of nowhere. Not sure what it's for. It's not very big. And the entrance has been practically covered in. WN25 was an ephemeral WN, just inland from Luxe-sur-Mer at this crossroads. WN26 was Longues. There were no landings at Longues-sur-Mer or Luxe-sur-Mer, as there were low cliffs that meant vehicles couldn't get off the beach. The 41 RMC landed at Sword Beach to go west, and the 48 Royal Marine Commando landed on Juno Beach to move east. 48 Royal Marine Commando advanced to Longues on the 6th, but found it too well defended as they were reduced in number due to such casualties on the beaches. The whole town centre had been turned into a strong point with fortified houses, i.e. blockhouse, surrounded by machine guns, mortars and an anti-tank gun. On the run up from the beach there was an anti-tank wall. Along the seawall there were rings to support posts to hold barbed wire. These are used today as flagpole supports. On the 6th, 2 Cromwells had been disabled approaching the strong point. On the 7th, here is Lieutenant Colonel Moulton watching an M10 attack the machine gun. To the east, towards Luxe-sur-Mer, is this machine gun position. Along there is Sword Beach, in the distance Hulgat, Deauville, then Le Havre with the coal-fired power station chimneys. That's 25 miles away. WN27 was Saint-Aubin. Saint-Aubin was the easternmost point of Juno Beach where there were landings. The North Shore Regiment landed here. This 50mm gun is all that remains of the strong point. To the west there were machine guns, mortars, a pillbox and a lookout post for inland guns. This was the easternmost point for landings on Juno because the cliffs start here. The 48 Royal Marine Commando landed here to go east to meet with the 41 Royal Marine Commando coming from Sword Beach. The North Shore Regiment men and the commandos were in range of this gun until they got near the cliff. Then there were machine guns and mortars on the cliff. This strong point caused many casualties. It was finally silenced late morning. A petard launched a flying dustbin at it. A white flag was shown, but then some Canadians were shot as they advanced. The fighting broke out again and continued in spite of white flags. 48 Germans were taken prisoner though. There's a DD, a tank, advancing down the road past the roadblock which had been here. WN-23 was at Tailleville Chateau. This charming 19th century chateau housed 3 German HQs. Hauptmann Deptola of the 2nd Battalion 736 Regiment had his HQ here. Hauptmann Johann Grzetzky of the Reserve 8th Company was also stationed here, and the local Gestapo. The essential services of the HQ were in underground bunkers. The grounds of the chateau, where the car park is now, was crisscrossed with trenches. Tunnels led to machine gun positions in the village streets. Openings in the wall allowed machine guns to fire through down towards Saint-Aubin. There were gun slits to allow a field gun to fire through. Just outside the wall there's a Tobruk for a machine gun. Its entrance is inside the chateau grounds. This ring stand for a 50mm gun could cover the north-facing wall of the chateau and the west-facing wall. And further along, just 50 yards up there, is the Tobruk for a machine gun. And in the tree behind me, there's a platform up there. And there's ladder rungs forced into the tree, so an observer could be up there. The Germans had an open view right down to Saint-Aubin. Around midday, Major Downey of the North Shore Regiment had cycled up the road towards the chateau on reconnaissance and found no traces of Germans. Lieutenant Colonel Buell ordered the advance across the fields around 12:30. The Germans must have seen Downey going up, but decided to keep quiet. Now snipers, mortars and artillery opened up from the chateau and the surrounds. The advance would have been impossible without the tanks of the Fort Garry Horse. They would take out targets they could see. There was a machine gun in the woods surrounding the water tower. Sergeant Drapeau was set to take them out with his mortar. With 3 shots, it eliminated them. Tanks circled the chateau firing over the wall randomly. Early afternoon, a tank crashed through the gateway into the chateau grounds. That's when they found out just how complex the defences were. Downey soon reported to Buell that the chateau was taken. Buell didn't believe him, as the speech was still coming under fire from artillery. It must be directed from an observer. Buell told Downey to clean out the chateau again. It wasn't till 2000 hours that Tailleville was finally taken. At one point, Buell was pinned down by fire from this machine gun before a tank came up to dispatch it. There's a bunker here in between Douve and the radar station in the middle of nowhere. Not sure what it's for. It's not very big. So the entrance has been practically covered in. Now the radar station at Douve was supposed to be taken on the 6th. As Tailleville had taken so long, they stopped for the night before continuing on the 7th. Now these woods to the northwest of the station were infested with Germans that had to be cleaned out several times. Once the Canadians emerged from the woods, they came under heavy fire from the radar station. Some of the British 51st Highlanders were added on to help in the attack. A British officer came up to see what the problem was. They showed him the hail of fire coming down on them. "Call up a petard," he said. The tank arrived, the officer got in it, and they started towards the station. Just then a shell came in and hit the 20 kilograms of explosives. When the dust settled after the explosion, the tank had disappeared. After that, the Canadians, in the face of a problem, would say, "Call up a petard." Now the radar station was in two zones, STP Douve 1 and STP Douve 2. The German name for the station was Distelfink, which means goldfinch. There were three types of radar: a Würzburg, a Fierre and a Wassermann. The Fierre was a grid radar, and there's a replica of one in the museum part of the station. Another was a Wassermann, which is a 30-metre high grid. The radar in place is a Würzburg. Being a dish radar, had more directionality but not so much range. The whole station had 9 anti-aircraft guns, 5 50mm anti-tank guns, machine guns and mortars. The radars took up a lot of power, so there were 2 generators and a transformer to supply them. In spite of the flak guns, the radar had been put out of action before D-Day. The British and Canadians laid a siege to it and moved inland, but the station was a good lookout post for the Germans, who could inform troops inland of the Allied troop movements. On the night of the 11th of June, Paul Gans, one of the Jewish commandos, and 2 other commandos went through the outer fence into the minefield. If you ran, you had a good chance of stepping on a mine. If you advanced slowly, you had a good chance of being seen. Gans had a method for getting through. He crouched, touching the ground, and advanced rapidly. He could feel if there was a mine. They got to the inner fence and cut through that. They were heading for the bunker called Mont in Douve 2. They saw that the guns were unmanned during the night, but the bunkers had heavy steel doors. See this video for the story of X-Troop. 2 nights later, Gans went back again with more commandos to take out the machine gun pits. He noticed fresh mines had been laid. A commando behind him set off a mine so they had to get out. The one who stepped on the mine lost his foot. The radar station was finally taken on the 17th with an attack accompanied by tanks. The bunker near Mont was called Hindenburg. The British put up a new sign. The Douve 1 part of the station has been made into a museum. It tells a story of the development of radar from the end of the 19th century. The Anton bunker received and treated the information. Officers could stand in a gallery looking down onto a map. Another site connected to Saint-Aubin, WN27, was WN28A. WN28A was here. We're about 3 miles inland of Juno Beach. There was a gun battery here with 4 105mm guns. So they could fire onto the beach. There was an observer position at Saint-Aubin, WN27, and they could tell these guns where to fire. There's nothing left here. So just like the guns at Breacourt Manor in the Band of Brothers, they were 3 miles inland from Utah Beach. They could fire onto the beach. These guns could fire onto the beach from here, directed by the observer on the beach. Juno Beach is over there. Those trees on the horizon, that's the Canadian Cemetery at Benny. Now, the Queensland Rifles landed at Beryle near WN 28. Company A landed to the right, behind me, past Canada House, and Company Sergeant Major and 2 other men went through a gap where there's a machine gun, shot the machine gunner, and crossed the railway line. Company B landed to their left, right opposite this gun emplacement. Despite heavy casualties, the gun was soon knocked out by getting up to it and throwing a grenade into the opening. This machine gun position was right on the perimeter of the strong point. It's been cut in half to make the promenade wider. Now, this photo is taken from a lower viewpoint than I can get to because of the sand. It's a lot lower then. The machine gun position had a box full of sand on the front rim to protect them from bullets from the sea. And this gun position had some vertical posts which stopped the gun turning round to fire the other way. But then there was a gun further down the coastline. Normally the gun was designed to fire that way towards Courseulles and could turn round and fire this way along the beach because those houses weren't there. But there were some posts here. You can see where they were set in. Wooden posts which stopped the gun turning so it could just fire that way. In front of the gun emplacement there was a machine gun here and another one further down there. Now, this gun emplacement is now a support for information on the Canadians' advance through Normandy and then further up through Europe. There's the flags of Canada, Denmark, Luxembourg, Poland, Great Britain, France, USA, Norway, Belgium. The gun emplacement was called the Cassine because this colony for children was here before and it was destroyed to make way for the gun. Now, because the other gun could only fire the other way, there was a gun here and it was in a wooden protection, so there's nothing left of it. Some years ago I was here with some Canadians and a man coming along the promenade on a bike, he stopped to talk to us. He'd been here on D-Day. Now, he'd been in the Merchant Navy, taken prisoner, and due to an agreement between Hitler and Pétain, many men were allowed home, so he was here on D-Day. Now, he said, they say the weather was bad on D-Day, but it wasn't that bad. But then a sailor's view of bad weather, or 4-foot waves I should say, isn't the same as a soldier's view being in a landing craft for 2 hours in 4-foot waves. But he did show me a shell in the back of this casemate. And he also showed me that house down there, which he said was the local brothel for the German soldiers. Now behind the brothel there were 3 mortars which could fire onto the beach. Some Canadian soldiers were buried just behind the house. And there was a tow block here, just inland from the casemate. Just next to WN28 was the famous Canada House. It was the only house left standing by the Germans, so it became a landmark for the Canadian soldiers, and any veterans coming back would always go and visit it. That's why it became known as Canada House. Now this was the railway station, because the railway line went along here where the road is now. It used to be the tourist office, it's now a flower shop. Now this road leading into Beryle town centre has been resurfaced many times in 80 years, but they've left these marks here which are left by tanks running up onto the pavement. This house here became the meeting point for the Canadian journalists. Being a small port, Courseulles had the most concentrated defences in all the landing zone. Now just behind me there was an 88mm gun, and then from here up to where the line of the buildings changes there were machine guns, mortars, and then there was a 75mm gun where the piscine is, or the swimming pool. Lieutenant Bill Grayson, he got off the beach. He went between some houses that used to be along the coast here, and then he saw there's an alley leading towards the 88mm gun, but it was protected by a machine gun. He noticed a machine gun fired in a set rhythm, so he waited till it stopped firing and he dashed towards it, but he got caught in the barbed wire. So he was expecting to get ripped to pieces, but the machine gun must have been changing the belt, and he managed to rip himself free from the barbed wire and ran towards the machine gun, threw a grenade into it. That was in a pillbox, and he went in the back door and he saw Germans going out the other door, heading down some trenches towards the 88mm gun, and he followed them. He got to the 88mm gun casemate and he heard the Germans saying, "Kamerad, Kamerad," and 35 Germans surrendered to him. So the 88mm gun was out of action. This 50mm gun protected the entrance to the harbour. It's been displaced from its original setting, but it was more or less here. So it's been hit. Now, whereas the DD tanks on Omaha Beach, they all sunk except 2. On the other beaches, many of the tanks got in. Now, Leo Gariepi was a DD tank commander. He arrived on the beach, just near here, with the Regina rifles, and he fired at a pillbox, knocked it out, and then took on the machine guns. Now, the road behind this tank is called Rue Leo Gariepi. So many people say this tank was his, but this tank didn't get in, whereas Leo Gariepi did get in. This tank sunk. It was taken out the sea in the 80s and put here. And it was actually Leo Gariepi who was instrumental in getting it here, because he lived in Courseulles at the time. It's now a support for emblems of the Canadian units. That's called a DD tank because it was a duplex drive. So there's two drives for the propellers at the back, which would push it through the water. And there'd be a canvas skirt riveted to this rim. And the 30-ton tank can float like that. On the map you can see the railway lines coming into Courseulles. This was the station, now cinema. There was a railway line that went through Beryle. The other side of the harbour entrance is WN31. Here there were 10 mortars, 7 machine guns, 2 50mm anti-tank guns, 2 75mm field guns and an observation bunker. Just the other side of the harbour entrance is this double opening gun emplacement. So the gun could turn inside and fire both ways. This structure was a mortar, Tobruk. Some years ago, somebody was walking their dog and it disappeared down a hole. And sometime later it came up somewhere else. So they realised there was a passage underground. So they dug down and they discovered this bunker just here. It was actually the first bunker built. It's very basic. It's made of concrete blocks rather than concrete. And then they built this observation bunker, and there was a passage that went, or a trench. You can still see the remains because it was bombed by the RAF. So it's just you can see the line of it here. And it goes to the observation bunker.
That's exactly right.
So you can visit these bunkers on a guided tour from the museum, Juno Centre, which is just there. Very good museum. So the observation point was there. It was a cupola. It's been taken away. And there was a machine gun position. Now this would have been just at the top of the beach. So they had the view along the beach, but now the dunes have moved due to the prevailing wind. So you can't see much from the position. This bunker is called Cozy's bunker. Lieutenant Cozy was given the job of attacking it with 35 men. He was wounded during the attack, so 150 engineers joined them for the attack. They set some explosives, and when that went off, it made the bunker tilt, and 35 Germans surrendered. But of the Canadian attackers, only 27 weren't casualties. But it's leaning even more than it was due to 80 years of wind pushing the sand around. There's a cross of Lorraine here because this is where de Gaulle landed on the 14th of June, a week after D-Day. Churchill had already landed here on the 12th, and then King George VI came on the 16th, all coming to see Montgomery at his headquarters at Crilly. Mont to Tobruk here, behind the Cross of Lorraine. There's another casemate here with a machine gun position in it. The gun port has been filled in, so you can't get in there. You see the sloping wall, which would protect the gun from fire from the sea. The Royal Winnipeg Rifles are landing here against all these defences, taking many casualties. And along there, in Love, the beginning of Love, the Canadian Scottish landed. Now the Royal Winnipegs and the Regina Rifles were coming up against well-entrenched German troops. The Canadian Scottish came in against Russian troops in the German army, and many of them ran away. So they more or less walked in. Their first objective was that casemate up there. Just here next to WN31, famous tank landed here, came through this opening. His mission was to fit in a ditch. It was a Fascine tank, an Waverly, armoured vehicle Royal Engineer, Fascine. They had a pile of logs on the front of the tank to fill in ditches. And because the pile of logs would interfere with a normal gun, they had a petard, which was a mortar that fired a 20 kilogram charge. So he came through here, and he got to where those houses are, and instead of filling in a ditch, it slipped into a big ditch. Now the ditch was too wide for normal bridge spans carried by the tanks, but with the tank in the middle, they could put 2 bridge spans across, supported by the tank, and the advance carried on. Now during the day, the bridge started to collapse, so the engineers filled in the ditch completely, and the tank was buried. And then in the 80s, local historian sort of rediscovered it and got it taken out of the ground and put here. Just last year in 2024, I was here. There were some British Royal Engineers giving it a coat of paint. The monument there to the Canadians. The structure looks like a windmill. It's actually a wind pump. Courseulles is famous for its oysters. Those oyster beds there. They used to use a wind pump to pump the water up into the oyster beds. Today they use electric pumps. There's a monument here to the Polish troops. Polish Armoured Division came in July to fight alongside the Canadians. So just here there's a ring stand for a gun, and just down there is a double Tobruk for machine guns. WN30 was just up inland of Courseulles next to the cemetery. I think there were 2 machine guns and a mortar surrounded by barbed wire. So nothing remains of that. So the Canadian-Scottish landed up there near Courseulles, and this was their first objective. WN33A. Now we've gone from WN31 to 33A because the Germans didn't number their bunkers, strong points, in accordance with the beaches that the Allies were going to choose. So 32 and 33 are in Gold Beach zone. Now this was a double opening. It's also made by blocks instead of being solid concrete, and it's one of the rare strong points to be knocked out by naval bombardment. So it was destroyed before the Canadian-Scottish got here. So they've blocked up the entrances so you can't get in. So this is Love on Juno Beach. No actual landings here because it's very marshy just inland. That's why the Canadian-Scottish landed near Courseulles. And then just up there, behind those houses, is Gold Beach. Now the Canadian-Scottish had an easy time landing, and their first objective was already destroyed before they got to it. Then they had to move inland to attack the Chateau of Vaux. They had to start fighting. Now you can help the channel by simple means of clicking on like, making comments, and also subscribing, which is free. You can also help the channel through Patreon or PayPal me. There's a link in the description.